Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Pat Parris from KGUN 9, welcoming you to our Facebook Town Hall tonight. We are going to discover, go in depth, and look at the return to work post-pandemic information session for Tucson and Southern Arizona, and small business employers, also welcoming employees as well, as we venture back into our office buildings, into our office workspaces from potentially most everyone working at home, or a lot of people working at home. And tonight I have a couple of really special guests that'll help me throughout the evening answering your questions and presenting what we need to know from a legal standpoint, from an HR standpoint. And you see in the top right of your screen, that's Sherri Smith. Sherri Smith, let me read her quick bio here real quick. Sherri is the founder of Smith Advisory Partners and a culture transformation consultant and leadership development trainer and coach. Smith serves as a board member of the Arizona SHRM Leadership Council, as director of workforce readiness, and is the recent past workforce readiness director of SHRM of Greater Tucson. That, of course, meaning the Society for Human Resources, Greater Tucson. And then to my left, top left in this screen, there he is, Ali Farhang. You may know him as a passionate community leader with the ability to motivate and inspire others to promote positive change in the community. Ali is the managing partner and an AV-rated employment attorney at Farhang and Medcoff. Ali is also a founding member and the chair of course, the Arizona Bowl, a great bowl game here in Tucson. Also a co-owner of the Sugar Skulls indoor football team and a varsity high school football coach. So don't mess with them. Ali knows exactly what he's doing on a football field. He also believes that making positive contributions in one community is an enormous aspect of living a successful and fulfilled life. And I'm going to start with you, Ali. The kind of give us the overscope, the legal issues that you see happening as people go back to the workplace that so many of us have been without for so long. A lot of people have been working from home, and now they face the real challenge. Some of it's a little intimidating for some people.
Absolutely, Pat. And it's a pleasure to be with you and Sherri here. Pat, of course, you're the velvet voice of KGUN 9 and the Tucson Sugar Skulls. So appreciate being with you here today. Listen, since this pandemic started 12 plus months ago, we've been building an airplane while it's in mid-flight. The good news is we've had time to build a lot of the parts. And now we're getting to a point where with the vaccinations, hopefully we see the light at the end of the tunnel. And the vaccination numbers in Pima County are certainly gratifying. But as your employees are returning back to work, there are numerous employment issues that have significant nuance to them that touch upon everything from Title VII and religious, gender, discrimination to the American with Disabilities Act, to the Age and Discrimination in Employment Act. So we're still building that airplane in mid-flight, and there's a lot of things that employers are going to have to deal with on a real-time basis.
And during the better part of this next hour, we will tackle a lot of those on this Facebook live stream. Sherri, real quick, I'll get your thoughts as well as a human resources expert and knowing the real hurdles that have to be cleared, or the piloting as Ali was talking about, the piloting of this airplane as we all make that landing and get back to the workforce that we're more traditionally used to.
Sure. Yeah. So it's basically just getting everyone ready to bring their employees back and or hire new employees and refill some positions, because some people that were let go have moved on. So, assessing for things like community readiness and schools being open and health support services for children and elder care concerns. Is there public transportation available for some staff members? And making sure that you have safety and equipment and hygiene training, masks, gloves, thermal scanners, hand sanitizers, and such. Just, like a return to work checklist that you're going off of to make sure that you are prepared to handle those things and be ready for them.
Yeah, and I know you're going to be going through a checklist that is going to be very important for employers. And as we mentioned, we invite questions that you can send to us on Facebook, and we will try to answer those throughout the next hour. I'll start the questions part of this with you, Ali. We'll talk about your frequently asked questions. And the first one is, what does an employer do if an employee that has been working from home wants to continue working from home?
Well, that's a great question. Now, before I answer that question, let me say there's a few things that post-vaccination people still cannot do. Number one, don't reply all to an email that does not solicit that email. And if your friend orders French fries in their meal, if you don't order fries, don't eat off their plate. Those calories still count. All right.
Yeah.
So let's have a baseline. Sherri, that's why I have Sherri. I do everything with Sherri because she laughs at everything I say. So it's very good for the ego. There is a point now where employers are looking to return to work, and the same rules that applied previous to the pandemic apply now. Is there a bona fide disability that would not allow for a reasonable accommodation so that they would not come back to work, or so that they could stay teleworking, right? A lot of employers, for example, have limited the essential functions of the job for some employees in order to allow for teleworking, because they were trying to stave off and be a responsible corporate citizen for this pandemic. But an employer is not obligated to do that. So if we get to a point with the vaccinations and other things where an employer wants people to return back to work, unless there's a sincere reason, whether it be a disability or in a religious accommodation, that the employer has to engage in the interactive process in order to potentially think about that as a possibility, then employees really must come back to work. It's not like I enjoy working from home is not sufficient enough. And we're at a period now, I think we're right at the precipice where employers need to, the best employers in our community engage in communication with their employees. And if you engage in those communications and you're transparent and genuine about them, then you can navigate through this difficult time. Just like we did a checklist, and Sherri really hit it. We did a checklist for the COVID period of, what things are you looking for? What things are you asking your employees to disclose to you with respect to how they're feeling? Just like we did that, we need a checklist for coming back to work. And I know she's going to cover it in detail, but that checklist includes such issues as, is there a genuine and bona fide disability which would require the interactive process or communication for an employer to potentially consider an employee continuing to telework? Or is there a sincere belief in some sort of religious accommodation where they can't get the vaccine when an employer may mandate the vaccine? And I'm going to tell you right now, employers can mandate the vaccine. It's in the Department of Labor, the EEOC, all kinds of different publications. But you can both mandate the vaccine and ask them for proof of that, because it doesn't violate HIPAA, since most employers are not a covered entity. So you got to keep that information confidential. But there are Pat, I'm not trying to make everybody out there hire a lawyer, but when it comes to coming back to work, a little advice goes a long way, because there are a number of nuances with this, just as there were back in April of last year when we were quarantining and having people stay, teleworking.
Well, that's why we have you on here. Is you're our legal advisor, and you're giving us some great information. Sherri, I'll bring you in real quick, because he talked about your checklist, and he was just talking about communication, and there's got to be a communication between the employer and the employee, and that's number one on your checklist, isn't it?
On the policy checklist, mainly for should there be a resurgence of this or something of the like, right? A pandemic regarding an outbreak like COVID-19. Having an emergency operations team ready and available to communicate not only to the staff, but also working with local, state, and federal and health agencies to ensure legal compliance with emergency response protocols to maintain safety and security inside and outside of the workplace. So yes, communication is critical. And as we all know, the quicker the communication flows, it mitigates fear and people reacting out of that as well. And it creates a more smooth process within the organization as well.
And that was the checklist, and we'll get much more into that and the emergency considerations down the road. But what, Sherri, real quick, are you hearing from employers? Allie had talked about the fact that they can make you get the vaccine if they want to. Are you hearing what employers have to say about that, or are they running into that situation in certain workforces that you've seen?
They have, yes, they've been inquiring about that, and they can mandate that because it is a public policy, right, a concern when it's a pandemic. If it were just an outbreak, a minor outbreak, like the flu, they can't, that's something that really wouldn't maybe be covered. But because it is the pervasiveness of this kind of outbreak, it is something that the EOC and the CDC are backing up.
Let's go to another question, Allie. Let's talk about what if an employee wants to be kept separate from other employees that have told him or her that they have not been vaccinated against COVID-19, and this employee has been vaccinated. So I'm safe, I'm protected, but those people aren't. I don't want to be anywhere near them. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, but I do read what the CDC puts out there. They put out two things that I think are fairly important. Number one is if you get vaccinated, your chance of getting the disease are minimal, and your chance of transmitting the disease are quite minimal. The second thing they said is if you've had COVID, your chances of getting it a second time are rare. Now, I know there's been incidents where it's been reported this happened, but according to the CDC, that's rare. So in a nutshell, the employee who wants to keep the distance if she's herself vaccinated, the risk is very low. And with just being succinct about it, she needs to chill out. So her obligation is not to, be her sister or brother's keeper. That's for that employee, male or female, to decide for themselves and engage in communication with the employer. So if they're vaccinated, they're good. And if they don't want to be around other employees that are not vaccinated, separate but not equal is not a thing in the United States anymore. So the employer can't keep vaccinated and not vaccinated separate. So chill out, man. That's really my answer.
Sherri, you look at this as from an HR standpoint. Yeah, you don't want to be dividing the office apart, one side versus the other, right?
No, you don't. And the biggest challenge is, and rightfully so, the biggest complaint is getting parents who say they have compromised children at home and having that a concern. And Ollie can address that more in detail as to what that's like. But it's a real valid concern for most people. And doing that, navigating it to keep your culture happy, right, your people happy, has been very tricky to navigate during these volatile and uncertain times, for sure. So, and you want to create inclusivity, right? It's what we're trying to all really embrace, especially today. And with this being something that's not really a cognitive diversity or cultural diversity, it's a whole nother kind of diversity, right? That can segregate people. How do we bring everybody together? Has been something that we've been trying to do, that I've been trying to help my clients do within the organization. Right.
That's a great point. Another question, along all these lines, you're talking about when you bring employees back, Allie, that the employees, are going to be wearing masks for the most part, I would think. I know in our corporation, the Scripps Corporation that I work for at KGUN, there's always the mask whenever you leave your little workspace. But the question here is, what if I'm sitting outside at lunch and a coworker is right next to me who's, maybe susceptible, more susceptible? What about the mask wearing at all times and when you're doing things like eating lunch?
Well, I think you got to maybe a level above is, maybe one thing our government officials could do better is incentivizing people getting a vaccine. And the way you incentivize people getting a vaccine is showing them, hey, listen, if we get to this number, potentially we can get into gatherings of this, these many people. Maybe we can fill the TCC to 75% if we get to this number. And then if we get right?
Let's hope. Yeah.
Here, maybe the masks go away. And I proffer, with all respect, and again, acknowledging I'm not a medical professional, that the number of infections per 100,000 is not the right metric, because there are going to be a number of people that just do not want to get the vaccine. So we should be measuring it on how many people got COVID. And again, secondary, getting it at second time is rare, and how many people have gotten the vaccine. For anybody that doesn't want to get the vaccine, there's going to be a certain time. And I don't know what this is. And it's a question I've been asking. What are the metrics for self-accountability? And because at some point, my law firm, we made the vaccine mandatory, and we made it by a certain date. And then we get to the 2 or 3 weeks where it's completely effective. We want to make it effective, not just for our own employees, but for anybody stepping into our office. And so do the masks go away at that time? I think they do, because of what the CDC says, but I'm still not sure. And I understand that healthcare professionals, Pima County, the city of Tucson, just like employers, are building this airplane while it's in mid-flight, and that science is one of those things that's determined over time. But I think that, one way maybe to incentivize people to get the vaccine is that those who have it and have passed that 2 to 3 week threshold are now able to live in a post-pandemic normal world without masks. And if you don't want to get the vaccine, whether it's not mandatory by an employer or whether there's some ADA disability or religious reason for it that's bona fide, maybe make them wear protective gear. But again, we're getting into accountability, self-determination, a lot of things that are, perhaps a little bit bigger than getting back to work in post-pandemic on a Facebook Live.
Could be right. Sherri, you're hearing what about mask mandates within offices, within corporations? Are you hearing it's pretty traditional that as employees come back, they are wearing masks still, even if they are vaccinated?
They are, and they're the thermal scanners for another measure. Of course, not everyone that has or carrying the COVID, show up with a fever. But, one of the things that you can do as well is designate another area. Again, it's not really inclusive, but it's another way that you can accommodate those that are concerned and don't want to get vaccinated, is designating the area, just like you would a mother who needs a private room to breastfeed. There's all kinds of ways that you can meet some of these individuals where they're at and what their needs are. If the organization has the facilities, the room to do that. So, yeah.
We're, if you're just joining us, Getting Back to Work Post-Pandemic is the name of our town hall here on our KGUN 9 Facebook page with Ali Farhang and Sherri Smith. I'm Pat Parris. Ali, we'll go back to you real quick. Another question, and Sherri just mentioned about temperature checks. Can an employer take the temperature of each employee every time they re-enter the workplace on the same business day?
So normally that would be a violation of the ADA, and an employer taking constitute a medical examination of an employee. But during a pandemic, the various applicable federal agencies have said that is okay. Now, the one thing with temperature checks is there is some debate as to their efficacy and whether or not it's a waste of time and resources to do that. Whether you're on the right or maybe this thing has been, this thing has been politicized.
Politicized, yes.
Right. So let's take the politics out of it, and let's all agree that there are certain optics to the pandemic, that whether or not they're actually effective is a matter of reasonable debate. And I think one of those things is maybe the temperature checks. I mean, I could take your temperature now and you could be, asymptomatic, Pat. So it's certainly within the power of the employer to do. And in fact, with SB 1377 that was passed by the Arizona legislature, giving employers and others liability protection for the pandemic, putting a reasonable protocol in place that's in good faith, gives the employers basically a shield from liability. So doing that is, whether the efficacy is questionable, but doing that is consistent with CDC guidelines, so they certainly can do that.
If there are, yeah, go ahead, Sherri.
I was going to say, I'd like to add on the caveat to that is you can do that. However, anyone in that job doing that same job would also have to be given a temperature check as well.
Gotcha. And Allie, along those lines, the umbrella protection, or how deep does that protection go? This new state law?
It goes fairly deep, and really what it comes down to is, do you have, just like anything else when it comes to employment law, do you have policies in place, and then do you follow those policies? So if a person and provider acts in good faith to protect their employees from a public health pandemic, they are not liable for damages in any civil action for any injury, death, or loss of personal property, is the way the statute reads, unless and that presumption is goes with the employer if there's any case filed, and the employee would have to prove that the failure to act or the action was not taken in good faith or was grossly negligent. So the protection is fairly deep, and it once again instructs employers that if you have a policy in place to protect your employees and you follow it, just like your annual sexual harassment training, and just the way you put in your employee handbook, how do you report claims of harassment, discrimination, etc. If you put policies in place and you genuinely follow them, then the employer will be protected.
I see you nodding your head, Sherri. I assume that it's pretty well spelled out for HR people to follow. Pretty straightforward, anyway. Yes,
and I'm glad that Ali emphasized that, because following the policy is what's going to protect you, because sometimes employers will start practicing something else. For instance, if you have a policy that all hourly staff come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, but everyone can trickle in whenever they want to, that practice now overrides that policy, as long as it doesn't violate a federal or a law, right, a state law. So making sure that you follow that policy that you have in place is of paramount importance, that I remind managers of all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Ali, the next question is kind of an extra one we've got here. Assume that an employer grants telework to employees for the purpose of slowing or stopping the spread of COVID-19. When an employer reopens the workplace and recalls employees to the work site, does the employer automatically have to grant telework as a reasonable accommodation to every employee with a disability who requests to continue this arrangement as an ADA Rehabilitation Act accommodation?
That's an excellent question, Pat. And before I answer that, I'm going to answer a question from Patricia Barrientos Quincy. I hope I pronounced your name right. And Patricia, I'm going to tell you, I don't know. And as I've gotten older and wiser as both an attorney and a human being, admitting that you don't know is actually a strength and not a weakness. So all I'm doing is reading the CDC guidelines, and I'm curious as to what the correct metrics are for opening up. I'm proffering that to everybody who's listening, that are we basing it off? I mean, when we started the pandemic, it was we're wearing masks and we're social distancing so we don't overwhelm our healthcare industry. And then we quarantined, and then we slipped up, and then the vaccines came out. And so the question now is, at what level of vaccinations, at what level of people that had COVID do we open up, and to what level? And I just wanted to make sure that I say this out loud. I am not suggesting an answer, because I may be a JD, but I'm not an MD. So that being said, I mean, to your question, any employer that decided to telework in order to slow the spread of the pandemic and was a responsible corporate citizen, like many were in Southern Arizona and across the country, those are not the rules now as we're coming back to work. And we still have the same analysis with employees as to whether or not somebody claims they have a disability that would require them to telework. Is that a reasonable accommodation? The same analysis as to whether that's reasonable. Is there another accommodation possible? that interactive process, that communication now comes back into play. Now we're actually back into our new normal with an ADA actual analysis. Same thing with if somebody says they can't come back to work for any other reason. So the answer to that is no. And, Pat, if I had you working from home and in order to slow the spread, to put it simply, and your essential functions of your job, Pat, if I decided you don't have to do two of those functions because it's not possible with you being away from the office and teleworking, those essential functions don't go away forever. So a reasonable accommodation never includes the diminishment of essential functions. So if I say come back to work, whether I make the vaccine mandatory or not, your essential functions then come back into play, and then we do a traditional analysis as to whether you need a reasonable accommodation to continue to telework.
And Sherri, so when you go back to work, you've been working remotely for the last 11 months. You're asked to come back to work. You can expect to do the same job you did when you were back at the building, not necessarily a more limited job that you were doing when you were teleworking.
Oh, well, no, I work remotely. I've always for myself. So
yes, but I mean the employee. We're telling employees, not you personally. Yeah. But you're helping HR get the word out that yes, your employees should expect to take back on that full workload that maybe they weren't doing when they were working from home.
Correct. Yes. Just like Ollie had mentioned, it is only a temporary situation that the EEOC and ADA has basically approved that those essential functions of the job, because of the nature of everyone teleworking and things like that, that they have accepted. However, moving forward, that may change because I'm sure they're going to have us put in place a framework that's going to help us navigate it better in this kind of an emergency situation, such as maybe creating even an emergency fund for those non-essential workers. Things like that. So you might see some of that stuff coming out soon.
And I got a question here that I want to ask you, Ollie, in just a second. But I'll ask Sherri this first. As you're going through this, and we've gone through this for the last year, I'm sure you've come up with a lot of ways to help these HR departments and these corporations and these even small businesses handle what has been all new to all of us. But at the same time, you're learning as you go for, God forbid this happens to us again, but it could.
Yes, a resurgence is, could be likely, and or something else. This isn't the only pandemic we've had, right, in history. So making sure that you have a framework to work from and the policies that will help address that, and emergency protocols put in place, like the emergency response team, things like that. Like I said, it may be an emergency fund for non-essential workers that, they're going to probably they can and probably put on the employers to start looking at doing instead of, relying on the government to do that. So those policies might be trickling down, coming. Yeah,
almost like an unemployment fund that employers pay into. They may have to do it for essential workers, non-essential workers. Right. Christopher Towne has a question for Ollie. Can an employer discriminate against a new hire if the new hire refuses to get a vaccine? So I suppose your office is a good example of that. If you were to hire somebody new and they find all of a sudden they have to get the vaccine, they say no, can you not hire them then?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christopher. Before I do that, and I know I keep couching things, but I feel a real Mr. Rogers vibe with Sherri with that couch. And I'm just wondering, I'm drinking my green tea. I kind of feel like putting slippers on and she's going to read us a book, right? Okay.
Do you have a cardigan with you?
Behind you in the train? Did I just age myself?
My butter rum drapes. No, I'm at a hotel.
Yeah.
For work, yeah.
Very relaxed. I mean, the smoking jacket and the pipe, Sherri, would go perfect with the whole setup. Christopher, you can set qualifications for employment, and one of those qualifications can be vaccination. As an employment lawyer that represents employers, I eschew the word discrimination. So what I would say is that if that is one of the qualifications of a new hire, you can certainly have it. Now, you can't treat people disparately. So there are certain protected classifications within Title VII. So if you, for example, decided that you're not going to hire a pregnant woman over the age of 40 because she didn't get the vaccine, but you hire a Hispanic male that's 26, that or you don't hire, or you do hire a Hispanic male at age 26 who also didn't get the vaccine. Now you're getting into disparate treatment. So you have to just treat people equally, but you can certainly, as a qualification for your employment, say, we want new hires to get the vaccine. As of now.
Yes.
Remember, airplane, mid-flight, putting it together. So
I got a question that just came off the top of my head. I don't know if either of you knew this or any of our viewers knew this, but I was in the Moderna vaccine trial back in August and September. So I was actually vaccinated back in September, and I'm still getting my blood drawn. They're still trying to find out how long these antibodies will last. There's a very good chance that, say, after a year, we'll need a booster shot. Ali, is it going to be your practice then at your office, and would you expect it to be protected as well if we're offered or we're told we're going to need a booster after 1 year to remain vaccinated against COVID-19? Will you employ that implement that at your office, and is that something that would be protected again for employers?
Yeah, well, way to put me on the spot on something that I have no idea about. But I mean, if the rationale is consistent, if we are mandating employees to get vaccinated, and then the science proves that a booster shot will enable our employees to continue to be healthy, and equally as important, when we want people to come into our office and feel safe. And in fact, when everybody gets the vaccination card, and I don't know why this is not done more. Like, we should laud companies, sports organizations, every single entity where we're like, hey, we have 100% vaccination. If we're trying to incentivize it, then we should put it out there. And I haven't seen it, and it kind of, it's a little dismaying. But I will say this: if it's required to get a booster shot to continue to keep not just our people safe, but the people that come into our office safe, I will absolutely mandate it. And barring any legislation to the contrary, that's the road we're going to go down. Yeah.
I mean, and as I said, we don't know for sure, but it does appear that might be a likelihood down the road. It might be a year, it might be 2 years. I've talked to several of the vaccine specialists, including the one at the University of Arizona, and she's kind of fearful that in about a year and a half, we may need a booster. So we'll just have to see. Sherri,
when you say that, sorry to interrupt, but so yeah. that really raises and puts employers in a predicament. So, we're all working towards, quote unquote, getting back to normal. So I know we have to adjust and we have to be flexible, but unless we, and again, maybe it's just me, I'm not hearing it. Unless we get to metrics that really make sense to people being as safe as possible, and then also being respectful of those who want to take the risk, we're going to continue to struggle with, okay, we need a booster shot, masks back on, not back on. And I think in football terms, you kind of did all my football CV. You can't keep moving the goalposts on people. Right. You got to give them actual numbers, and you got to give them actual goals to attain, or else this could get, I fear that this could, spin out of control more than necessary, both from a public health standpoint and from our economy standpoint.
Well, there's still some unanswered questions, and we just won't know until we get down the road a little bit further. Sherri, the same kind of question, HR departments are going to have to be thinking about this in the future if there are booster shots in our future, what they'll do, if they'll handle it the same way or how they will handle it.
Right, and getting ahead of it as soon as possible by implementing those policies now, having those discussions and then codifying it, right? If that is something that you're going to do moving forward. just like Ali's office, maintaining that consistency, as he mentioned. So
we've got a question from a good friend of mine who's on the morning blend here at KGUN 9, and it's Alex Steiniger. And Alex's question is, what role, if any, should COVID tests play going forward for employers? So we talked about temperature checks. Ali, is it feasible to mandate COVID tests?
I mean, at the time being, yes. I mean, so we are still in the place and time where we want to communicate with our employees that please be transparent if you have any of the symptoms that have been laid forward by the CDC with respect to potentially having COVID, to report it to the employer, and then to quarantine and get a COVID test to assure that you can come back to work. So nothing has changed with respect to that until we get to, some point in time, which I am not aware of, where we have gotten a certain percentage of our population vaccinated.
Yeah, it's and you kind of brought it up too, Ali. The goalpost gets moved, and a lot of this, the goalpost has been moved. Sherri, from an HR perspective, and what you are consulting with employers about, at first it was we're going to go home just to slow the spread, to make sure that the hospitals don't get overrun. Now that seems to be a lot different, doesn't it? But we don't know exactly what it is. To Ali's point, we don't know exactly what we need to get to in order to feel all safe, take the masks off, and get back to quote unquote normal, do we?
No, they're trying to figure that out, and especially the essential workers. I work a lot with organizations that have been essential workers this whole time. So knowing who should come back, what roles to merge into the others that get left behind, and that have to run the ship, so to speak. But yeah, it's been a very stressful time for people to navigate a lot of these things, as Ali had mentioned. Building the bridge as we walk on it, right? So
exactly.
And who's to wear masks, and you see people loosening up over time. With wearing the masks and their space. I think they're getting more comfortable with a lot of the protocols and keeping the distance. And you see people making the necessary office arrangements, right? Moving people further apart and having room control as far as how many people can go into one room at a time. Sanitation practices have changed. So I think that a lot of these practices, I think, will stay, to be honest. So.
That's another thing. The infectious disease specialist that I've done a couple of stories with at the University of Arizona, Dr. Connick, she says, we've learned a lot of valuable lessons here, and remember, we never got the wave of flu, the common flu that we normally get. I don't know if you two have noticed that there haven't been a lot of colds being passed around either, and maybe we figured out at least a few things in that sense. Sherri, have they consulted with you about, the plexiglass dividers and how far apart should our workstations be, and should we go back to everybody has their own office and they close the door? Have you been consulted on that?
With really sensitive legal things like that, I'll have them consult their counsel, or I'll call Ali and talk to Ali. But no, maybe a little bit about logistics and things. I try not to consult on things like that because I'm more culture and leadership. But
Gotcha.
I've done more with managing the stress and how to really manage their time with the double, doing more with less and things like that. So. Right.
Have you implemented any of those things, Ali, at your office? And have you been consulted about what legally you can and can't do as far as moving workspaces around and things like that in corporations or companies?
Absolutely. And, I give a lot of credit to my team here, because we were at the forefront of this in March of last year, sending out a lot of free advice with respect to COVID-19. And this was the number one issue is, how do you deal with the workplace, keep it safe? We followed, both the CDC and Pima County because they provided a lot of really good information on that. So it's not as much as of late I think it's going to pick up now as people come back to work, because I think those questions are going to be paramount as to, do we need to do all this? And the answer is, first day of law school, they taught you the best answer and the most often used answer in the legal world is maybe. Tell me more, right? So there's a lot of questions with respect to it, but I think that we're in a, they called it the novel coronavirus for a reason, right? So it's new, and
Brand
so
new.
Everything that we've done, whether it's from the inception to, hopefully we're in the fourth quarter here, it's still novel, and all we can do is kind of follow guidance, make best business decisions that are reasonable, and then continue to communicate with our employees and, have HR, and Sherri knows this, have HR be a resource for our employees instead of an adversary against our employees.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned, Sherri, that there's a psychological toll that gets taken from not being in your workplace, or the stress of being home and feeling the pressure. And you mentioned that was part of what you've been working on during this last 12 months as well.
Yes. So those that were left at the organization, there was a little bit of guilt because they were fortunate, they felt fortunate to be there and have a job still, but they were also having to absorb 2 or 3 jobs for those that were considered non-essential, and or if there was a furlough or maybe a RIF, reduction of force, in the organization. So, but they were also just overstressed with work, having to do more with less, fewer resources and people resources. And then those at home that were working from home for whatever reason, ADA accommodation, felt isolated and depressed and not really felt like they were in the know and things like that. So you dealt with, so we switched from KPIs and productivity to, okay, let's stop on these goals and metrics and let's switch to stress management so that you can take care of yourself. So there was a lot of self-care during that time. And that's something that I hope to see employers really address in the future as well, and having wellness programs set up and how to manage a lot of that overload and burnout. Because if that's happening and people are not happy and or depressed, as we all know, our mental health can take a toll on the engagement of anything, right? The engagement of our relationships at home, the engagement of our productivity at work as well, and quality of life. So.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. Let's real quick, Sherri, as we're getting into a little bit later into this program, this town hall, let's have you talk about your checklist now and things that you've learned and that you are now going to, moving forward, have to be ready for. You've learned a lot and you're ready to share with employers about what you've learned, I guess.
So the checklist as far as coming back to work, or the policy checklist, or things that I have personally encountered as some needs.
How about it's the policy checklist that he's got up on the screen now. Is that correct? You want to talk about that?
Yes. So the policy checklist is, let me pull mine up here because I can't see that one very well. So the communications, as we talked about earlier, and having the people that are going to run that, recruitment and engagement is another thing that you're going to want to revisit if you don't have a policy in place. Identifying critical roles and functions. This was huge, especially in the medical industry. Any industry, but medical industry, it's just like, what are those functions, as Ali mentioned, that are the essential functions? And still with that, what are the ones that really are going to move the needle and are critical, and which ones can you kind of eliminate or automate, right? And then the other one is special needs and accommodations, such as reporting and self-disclosure, so that if first responders are aware, that they're aware should an employee fall ill on the job, et cetera. So having that policy in place. And obviously, I'm just going through a real quick and dirty about what to put under there for consideration. Remote work, IT concerns were a huge thing. Getting people set up with the right firewalls, and knowing whether your policy is going to have any kind of language about reimbursement for them using their own property if they are remote working, and or using their own Wi-Fi, et cetera. Those are some things to consider. And then a backup plan if it is a real critical role right down to having, are you going to need a generator? Are you going to need battery sites so that if somebody can't work from home, are you going to have off-site remote locations? Infection control measures are another thing. So having annual training set up, use the OSHA guidelines as a starting framework, and a preparedness plan, and then personal protection equipment and items, having that under consideration for that part of the policy. And then recruitment, hiring, and engagement. That was another big, huge thing that came up over the pandemic too. So these are you're going to see some changes in these policies as well. So reviewing your hiring process and practices, I-9s, if you're going to have to do that and do a background check for the I-9s, how are you going to do that, especially if the person's remote? And the delay and or start of a new hire due to COVID-19 symptoms. Are you going to rescind offers? You can if you need them immediately. So knowing those laws and having that policy in place. And then the employee leave and pay policies will change as well. So consider like administrative leave for non-essential employees. And again, as I mentioned earlier, establish possibly an emergency response fund for non-essential workers. And, PTO, how's that going to be structured? A lot of companies over COVID, what they've learned is that it was just a nightmare to keep track of PTO. So they went from the use it or lose it structure PTO to an unlimited PTO, because what happened at the end of the year is that so many people were not taking their PTO until December and they were going to lose it. So then they ended up with a skeleton crew and not having enough people. So these are all the things that you need to consider. Again, employee assistance programs, wellness programs, on-site, off-site for remote workers, and or accommodations for that. So workers' compensation, remote workers and locations, that's going to be a big one too. How do you do investigations for remote workers? Maybe put something in your policy about that. And then disciplinary and other corrective actions. Investigations has been a big hurdle for companies to really delve into, especially for remote work individuals. And then the last one is business continuity plan. So really looking at that to make sure that your business and enterprise is where it needs to be.
And moving forward, Ali, from a legal standpoint, there are things that have been learned throughout this pandemic that you will, you put in your action plan moving forward, I'm sure, or those that you consult with, the employers that you consult with. Yeah,
I think Cassandra and Alex both asked kind of really good questions on the chat, and I think it kind of relates to what we're talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that, your workplace is all about the culture, and that culture emanates from the leaders. And so if you've got a culture of communication and, embracing what's in the best interest of the employee, that you're going to have those discussions that we're going to be able to get through this together, no matter what the issue is. So if an employee can't get the vaccine because a doctor says, Cassandra, that they can't get it, then that's covered by the ADA. And then any good employer is going to have that conversation, engage in that interactive process, and try to determine if there is a reasonable accommodation that doesn't act as an undue burden on the employer. And when I say undue burden, that means a significant cost or burden. It can't be de minimis, right? And then if, like Alex is saying, if you have an employee that's just against it, what's your culture as an employer? At Farhang and Medcoff, we not only espouse an ethos of being leaders in the community, but we try to we endeavor to engender that through our actions. So we made our decision based on our culture that we're making the vaccines mandatory. Not everybody is doing that. So if you have an employee that doesn't want to get the vaccine, engage in that conversation with caring and kindness and understanding, and then try to determine if there's a way to make it work that is beneficial both to the employer and to the employee. Now, if there's no disability and there's no religious, and as I understand it, I don't know. I think Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses have shown a history of not being for vaccinations, but there might be others. if you treat whatever the employee says with sincerity and try to work it out, usually it both engenders a good, continued good culture and work environment, as well as puts the company in a position where they can continue to benefit from that employee's work on behalf of that company.
And Sherri, along those lines, it was Alex Steiniger who offered another question, and Ali just kind of hit on that. And it is about your, and there's the question, and it really down at the bottom, it's about, the kindness and the understanding. And it is a line of communication, right? That you would have to have as an employer, your HR department with that employee, is to try to figure out if there's some compromise or some reason that you can at least discuss.
Well, yes. I mean, if it's already codified in policy, the employer has the right, first of all. But yes, Alex brought up a great point about, how do we have these conversations with kindness and understanding? And that's a big piece of, diversity and inclusion, and right, making sure that everyone's point of view is heard and validated, and that they are feeling like what they have to say is valued as well. So having those conversations is the best way. And one of the things that I've come across is sometimes it's just, having the conversation and understanding and educating each other on the differences. And sometimes if you can, maybe they'll be like, oh, okay, well, I was just afraid because I didn't have enough information. And maybe if you have those enough dialogue, they may come around, they may not. But I do think approaching it, as Alex mentioned, with kindness and holding space for one another and our differences and beliefs that are even divergent from our own, right? I think it's important for a culture that really does say that they embrace diversity and inclusion, for sure, as well.
I'll let you in a little secret. I'm doing a story on Wednesday for KGUN 9. We're talking about how the number of people that now say they are either getting the vaccine, have gotten the vaccine, or will soon be getting the vaccine has actually gone up pretty steadily since December, and it's now at an all-time high. It's about 75%, and that 75% is right about where the CDC and other doctors will say that's about that herd immunity level. So, Ali, kind of along what you've been talking about all along is maybe there's some something we can do to incentive, some incentive we can give people, but maybe it's just we want to be part of the winning team. And if it's 75% and growing, that's part of the winning team. And people might, once you explain that it's safe, it's effective, you don't have to worry about, and why don't you join the team that we're all on, or a lot of us are on anyway, and it's the growing team.
There's I think we've lionized individuality so much in the past 20, 30 years. We forgot about the sense of community. I mean, you remember World War II, people did without butter. They did without all kinds of goods and services because they went to the war effort to defeat a fascist regime. And so, again, I'm not a doctor, but I think that these are one of these moments in time where we can galvanize and come together. I mean, if the COVID-19 was a plume of purple smoke or an alien, we would all be together on this to fight it in unity. So, if you feel that, with all due respect, if you feel that, Bill Gates is going to follow you, by the way, get rid of your cell phone if you think that's true, and get off all social media, or that you get, there's 5G or whatever it is, then in the words of Flavor Flav from Public Enemy, I can't do nothing for you, man. Good luck. But I think these are one of those times in life that we can come together. And I actually thought for the Sugar Skulls, it would be great to have half the stadium who's got vaccinations and have them with no masks and everybody there and packed. And then the next side, if you don't want to get the vaccine, with masks and social distancing, just to incentivize people like, look, that's what normal looks like. So again, not being a doctor and also not being a conspiracy theorist, I just think this is one of those things that can bring us all together. If we've got two sets of politics that have been come and play during the pandemic. If you take that out and you just deal with the facts, then I think, this could be a good moment for us, and we can come to creative ways to succeed and find a way to yes instead of the easy way of no.
Well, let's start heading down the home stretch here and wrap this up as we get towards the finish line here of this hour. Sherri, I'll let you kind of surmise what you've learned, what you're telling your clients as in the human resource realm about what you've learned, as I mentioned, and what going forward you hope to impart to them in order to get us back to a workplace post-pandemic that works for everybody.
Again, just making sure you have a lot of the practices that you want to go and moving forward regarding this, whether you want to be pro-vaccination or not, just make sure you get that codified and make sure that you're consistent with that. My biggest thing that I would hope to see going forward, and what I've helped out with through the pandemic, again, is the stress management, self-care, having healthy boundaries. And again, like with remote workers, it's not any easier working from home. Sometimes it's worse because you don't shut off, right? You can work till midnight and not take your vacations or you're juggling family at the same time of trying to do work and stuff. So just making sure that employers are well aware of taking care of their staff. And because if you do, they're your number one customer, your internal customer, right? They're going to take care of you and take care of the business as well. And it's all about really helping each other and through times like this. And you really see people. I've seen a lot of beautiful stories of people really coming close. I worked with some clients earlier today, and they just talked about how they've become closer as a team through this type of crisis as well. So
yeah, it's interesting that you can actually still be close knit as a working community or team, even through the Zoom calls, and you can find a way. I guess where there's a will, there's a way, and sometimes you just make it work. Ali, let's kind of wrap things up from your perspective, from that legal perspective, and what you see going forward.
Yeah, I mean, what I see is it reminds me of a conversation Steve Kerr had with Pete Carroll before he took the Golden State Warriors job, and Pete said, how'd you prepare for the job? And Steve went through his offensive philosophy, his defensive philosophy, and all kinds of things that were like X's and O's. And Pete Carroll said, no. What are the core fundamental beliefs that you have that are non-negotiable? That's the culture that you build. And each employer's got to ask themselves that same question and answer it for themselves. No lawyer can do it. No HR consultant can do it. But the R in HR stands for resources. So be a resource to your employees. Engage in that communication. Determine what your culture is. What is your philosophy? What are your core beliefs? I've told you mine very candidly. And right or wrong or indifferent, if you stick to that, then at least you're genuine. And when you're genuine and you're passionate, you can't go wrong. So, there's going to be, we're not done with this. There's going to be a number of other things that come up that we're going to have to adjust to. So remember that, we're all part of this together. We're all, people just trying to make our way, and continue that communication, employers, with your employees. And, if you need help, there's at least one good attorney out there that's happy to help you. So,
yeah.
Do you mean you? Is that who you're talking about? I couldn't tell.
You said it, not me, Pat.
Oh, okay. I think you're a pretty good one. I think that's probably a good thing. Sherri, I want to give you one last word because we're gonna let you kind of take us home here.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to echo what Ali was saying. I do a lot of culture work and centered around values-based leadership. And he did hit the nail on the head about knowing what your values are and letting that be your guiding principles, right? Know what your guiding philosophy is as well. And that's going to help you recruit the right people as well for your organization, regardless of what you believe in or which route you want to go. But and Ali, you brought it up earlier too about putting it out there, right? If you are or aren't, if employers are authentic and really embrace that, then they're going to attract more of that as well. So that'll make it an easy way to also build a culture, but also recruit for that culture as well. So moving forward. And I wanted to just note too that the checklist you can find for the policies are on SHRM GT website. So there you go, Facebook.com.
There it is.
Thank you. So you can go there and find the checklist. And if you need any help, SHRM of Great Tucson can help you navigate through any of those policies. And of course, any of the legal stuff for sure, Ali, and culture stuff. contact.
There you go. There you go. Guys, you taught me so much tonight. Yeah, really are. I've learned so much tonight. I hope our Facebook Live viewers have as well. Real quick, I want to thank Henry Rios from KGUN 9, our HR director, Pam Beach, of course, I think she's in the background listening here, and then Sam Radwaney, our digital guy, our digital guru. Sam's doing all the work behind the scenes. And thanks to everybody who sent questions in. We had some really good ones tonight, and we do appreciate that. I hope you learned something, and I hope the conversation will continue. We hope to do more of these town halls, and hope to have both of you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Pat.
All right, you guys.